Hello, lovely people. We are live again. for another live broadcast with a great photographer. It's going to be a really good session this evening. I will tell you a little bit about it in a second, but firstly, put your name and where you are watching from, please, in the comments there. We've already got someone from New Zealand there, Stuart Hampton, from tuning in 6:30 in the morning with his tea in New Zealand. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks for watching us before you go to work, I would presume. We've got someone from Canada here, Morella. Thank you for watching. And then we've got Suffolk, Michelle from Suffolk there, Berkshire, Orlando. Ooh, look at that. That's probably as hot as Orlando in England today. It's bloody really hot this evening, which brings me to the beer of the evening, which is just a lovely Coors Light, because it is a very hot day for me. So cheers. I hope you're joining me. Another thing, the album of the month is back. I've managed to figure out how to get the album so that you can see it. All right. Ta-da! Guess the album. Put it in the comments. And then the other thing is the book. Is a little bit of a promo here. The new book. It was released in the USA yesterday, and it is already #1. #1 in the new releases. So thank you to all of our American followers for buying it, basically. So yeah, there we go. Right, I've got best album ever, and then I've got, here we go. That's Led Zeppelin, and Alan's got it straight away. There he is. Alan, Led Zeppelin 1. Well done. And it is definitely one of the best albums ever. So, right, we have got Robert Canis with us tonight, and it's going to be a really, really good session. The session is titled Passion Projects in Nature and the Landscape. Right now, I got Robert in on purpose because I've been hearing a few people, they've basically been asking me, like, how do you keep focused? How do you get focused? And someone actually emailed me and said, how do I put meaning into my work? Right. So I just think that this is going to be a really good session. And the other thing as well, actually, for me, I think I need a kick up the backside. So I'm really looking forward to it myself. I've been so wrapped up in the business. It's doing really well, by the way. You know, we're actually really kicking off. But the downside of that is I've not been out with the camera for, I think, about 3 months. And that's absolute truth. So I'm hoping that Robert's going to give me a kick up the bum as well. All right. Right. Without further ado, let's bring Robert into the stream. And here he is. Hello, Robert. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's just more than a pleasure. So I've just introduced, obviously, what the session is about. And I'm going to now just hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about yourself. And then just let me know when you're ready. I've got your slides, and
lovely.
And we can get going. All right.
I mean, with that, if you wouldn't mind putting the first slide up, please, Mark, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. Here we go.
Okay.
Yep.
Right. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, wherever you are, hello. I can't say good evening or good morning or good afternoon because from what I see, you're all from around the globe. So really nice to be here and speaking to you on my project work. I thought rather than putting up a resume, it would be just a touch more interesting to give you an insight as to how young I started with my photography. And by the way, that's a picture of me. That's not just a random picture I put up. That's me. And when I discovered my mother passed away a few years ago, and you know how you kind of go through photo albums, etc. I didn't know this picture existed. Until I came across it, and I just thought, what a lovely moment she's captured. She was kind of the family photographer, you know, shooting with a twins lens reflex Yashica, and I have boxes full of these 2¼ inch slides, you know, this takes over the years. And this was one picture that really resonated with me. And I think images like this say so much more than just a selfie, don't you think? Or just a picture of kids lined up looking at the camera. And it's a lovely picture that she took of me. Just sort of, no idea where it's taken, probably Canberra Sands or Hastings. That was places that we used to visit as kids, you know. So, yeah, I guess you could say I started really young. In fact, my interest in nature began much, as is the case with many nature photographers. It begins with nature and you kind of move on to photography as a means, what it did for me, of sharing what I was experiencing in the countryside to others. You know, from a very early age, you can see from about 6 or 7, I was given my first camera, a Kodak Brownie 127. And then a pair of binoculars. I joined the Young Ornithologist Club, so I was really interested in bird watching. And fortunately, and I live in the same town where I was born and grew up, where I live very close to the countryside. So even now, the places which I visit on a regular basis, I've been doing so very regularly now for more than 40 years. Um, and that kind of leads on quite nicely to project work, because actually undertaking a project of an area that is close to where you live is of course far easier than when you've got to make a real sort of concerted effort to get in the car and travel hours or hundreds of miles to get somewhere. If it's somewhere on your doorstep, whether it be an area of coastline, woodlands, marsh, orchard, and it needs to be anything as examples you'll be seeing this evening, too exciting at first glance. That is a lot easier to undertake than, say, somewhere where you really need a lot of effort. So I guess really from the moment I bought my first Nikon camera, Nikon FE, and I still use Nikon now, that's really when my interest in nature photography went on. And I was very lucky, actually, that when I was about 11 or 12, I was introduced, I didn't know at the time, a chap just a few doors away from where I lived by my mum, who saw a presentation of his, a lecture, you know, and he just happened to be a semi-professional nature photographer and one of the country's leading naturalists. He helped co-author books on badgers and birds, and he had this encyclopedic knowledge, sort of Chris Packham-esque knowledge of all things nature, you know. He's a passionate conservationist and a really blinking good photographer, you know. So he became my mentor, and right up until the time of his passing in his 70s, we would spend some wonderful evenings. You know, everything was projected on a screen, you know, in his studio, and polishing up a couple of glasses of whiskey maybe in the process, and going through photography. And he never really got to experience the digital age. And I'm not sure whether or not he would have embraced it quite as keenly as some, but I couldn't have met anybody else better, really, because if there's one thing with nature photography that is more so than any other genre, and that is, you've got to love what you do. I mean, you've really got to, because invariably you spend an inordinate amount of time out in the field in all weathers. And particularly with wildlife photography, there is a lot to be gained from having prior knowledge of the subject. If you want to know where to find it and how best to photograph it, if you want to capture an interesting aspect of its behaviour, and have a real empathy with it, I guess, really care for it, you know, because hence the title Passion Projects. You've really got to be passionate about what you're photographing, whether it be the landscape or in nature, to get the most out of it. I know when I've had enough of a project, because I start to get a bit bored and I start to lose that passion for it. And that's usually, I find, about this, if I'm doing a long project, about the 4-year period, 3 to 4 years. After that, I kind of feel as I'm going through the motions, and that's when you need to stop or at least take a break. Nobody's saying that when you undertake a project, it should be continuous and you should eat, sleep and breathe it. I often have multiple projects on at the same time, and I dip into them. And I find that's a way of retaining sort of a freshness to the work and keeping myself interested. So if we can go on to the next slide, please, Mark. Thank you. So one of the first projects I did, and these must be, or at least 10 years ago now, is of a local woodland, albeit it's about half an hour away from where I live, called Kingswood. Some of you watching here this evening will know about this woodland. It lies in between Faversham and Ashford and is one of Southeast England's largest woodlands. It's predominantly beechwood, although there's lots of sweet chestnut and conifer plantations, which they're now getting rid of and planting sort of native species. It's Forestry Commissions, which planted a lot of conifer at the time, which is really useless for wildlife, quite frankly, unless it's Caledonian pine in Scotland or etc. But so anyway, there's a lot of beechwood, and of course, it's a fantastic place in the autumn for colour. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to do a project, but not of this sort of 600-700 acre woodland, but of a really small area, because otherwise it's all too easy just to walk great distances but not capture anything in particular. You know, invariably as photographers, we have quite a heavy backpack or a tripod, especially in the autumn and winter months when the light's really low. And so I really wanted to restrict the area. And I wrote a blog about it after I did that. So for a week, I spent seven days, 6-7 days, 8 hours a day. They're about 8 to 10 hours from sunrise to sunset in an area no bigger than 800 square meters. That was it. Just a really, which sounds quite big, but of course it isn't. It's actually really small. But what I found is that by arriving each morning, you would know where the sun rose, where it set, where you'd seen some developing mushrooms, where colour of trees were just starting to appear. And you obtained, even though it was really small, a really sort of intimate knowledge of this area.
Was this area of woodland, was it like surrounded by grassland, so it's just like a little patch of woodland? Is that what it was like? Or
no, it's actually a really large area of woodland. It's at least 600 acres. It's a really substantial bit of woodland, but this particular area
you just
very
chose
quiet.
like a section of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's very quiet. It's seldom visited by the public because it's kind of a bit too far for people to walk to. But I know of a back entrance. So I was able just to have this little patch, as it were. It's on a slight hill as well, so you get the early morning sun and set, rising and setting sun, as opposed to it being in the many dips within the wood. So sort of whole days were spent just minding myself, really. I've always been very keen in showing the intimate landscape as well, in that it's not just about the bigger picture, but also having a makeup of smaller details as well, whether that be coloured leaves, dew on twigs, as you're seeing here, and backlit beech trees, and of mushrooms as well. And by that, and particularly with a project where you're shown a location, I think you have a much more interesting portfolio as a result, rather than them all being wide-angle landscapes, perhaps with directional light, creating long shadows, etc. I think it could.
This is a lovely picture. This is something different, isn't it? This one here.
Yeah, but all quite simple, I guess. When you see it, it's just sun coming through, creating backlight on the drops and on the leaves. Of course, a longish lens used here, sort of 200mm or thereabouts. And really just trying to create a portfolio of images that evokes a spirit of the place, which I think as photographers is something that a lot of us is trying to strive for, and that is to evoke an emotive response from the viewer. So they don't just sit and look at a pretty picture, but maybe they feel something about the time in which you photographed it, which is my next point, and that is, aside from photographing, it's really important, as much as it was in the days of black and white, that you get to grips and become a little bit of a master at post-production. It's so important that you learn the skills of Lightroom, Photoshop, or whatever it is that you're using. It's no different to when I used to develop film and print black and white in my bedroom. Unless you knew how to do so, how can you possibly translate what you were seeing and viewing either on the screen or, better still, as a print? For some people, I can understand it's all a little bit mind-boggling where they see so many sliders, etc. But it's like everything. You wouldn't expect to learn a language in 5 minutes, but if you do a little bit and often, and once you really start to learn the nuances and the subtleties of hue, saturation, luminance, and color gradings, that kind of thing, it can make an enormous difference to your photographs, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
As much as it does by using the equipment.
Yeah, I think that some people are just scared of computers. As well. They sort of fear them, particularly if you're of a certain age, shall we say? At a certain age.
Well, I mean, I'm feeling, okay. It kind of goes with the job as such, and you kind of have to, but it really doesn't take that long because, with Photoshop, I can understand because it wasn't designed for photographers. My uncle was a commercial artist, and when I saw him on his Mac with Photoshop, performing all kinds of wonderful things, moving objects within the screen. And you have all these submenus upon submenus, and with Photoshop, of course, you've got to save it as layer tips, etc. With Lightroom, you don't. It's far more intuitive. And even if you just work your way down the right-hand panel and you don't go beyond any further than curves, that will get you there. At least by doing that, you'll get to learn contrast, and not to necessarily push the blacks all the way up and the whites all the way down, but learn to really use your initiative, I guess, and your common sense when to push and when not to, and go back to photographs as well. Particularly if I'm producing a print, I rarely process and print there and then. I leave it to marinate, as it were, and then I'll come back and then I'll look at it again, and you kind of see it with fresh eyes. One trick I often perform when I'm showing workshop groups is that when I'm processing an image, to really get an idea of tonal balance, light and dark areas, I'll turn the photograph upside down. And this is quite a common practice, particularly amongst hand printers, etc., because then you no longer see it as a photograph, you see it as a range of tones and light and dark areas.
That's right.
And there are some
Artists do the
glaring
same
areas
thing
come
as well.
out then, that you can work.
It's common practice in drawing and painting as well, as a matter of fact.
Yes, I understand.
Because it does exactly that. It doesn't matter. It's a visual piece of art. So you forget what it is, and it just turns into tones and shapes, and
that's
and you go from there. But,
it's good.
These are. I'm assuming these are all still from the same project that I'm.
No, actually not. So if you want to go backwards,
sorry, I'll have to go
that's
back.
all right.
I was just saying.
No,
I can go back.
You go on. That's fine. If you just want to go back one more, that'd be great. Thank you, Mark. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, you can go on here. I tend to these days not carry around as much equipment as I would like necessarily, because it can be a bit of a hindrance. And I'm much more inclined these days to carry less because, ironically, there are fewer decisions to make, right? The more gear you have, then the more choice you've got. If you have, and you'll see examples of a project I did where I just use one lens in a location for 1 hour for a week throughout the year. And I found it a very freeing experience because I just had a 50mm prime lens. I didn't have all these choices to make, as in there's an insect, I need a wide angle lens, etc. But certainly with this, where I'm restricted to a small area, my equipment, it's a single DSLR, and this is a 15mm fisheye lens, and then going up to a 70-200 with a macro lens, polarizer, etc. Between that, and of course, a tripod and a beanbag for really low angle pictures. You can see the curvature here. That's a main giveaway. This one, the next one of a saffron drop, this one here. It's the importance, I think, of when you're seeing photographs, and that is not to necessarily be 100% satisfied with what you're seeing and then move away onto the next subject, but to maybe contemplate this in, unless you're photographing a moving subject where you might just have a moment to grab it and move on. With something like a landscape or with a mushroom or a flower, slow down. There's no rush. Much better for you to go home with 1 or 2 pictures that you're really proud of, certainly I think, than it is with 50, 60 pictures that rarely see the light of day. I had to be really careful when photographing this because I'm really close with a macro lens. It's only about 1.5 inches, 2 inches high. And so I was having to kind of inhale then exhale by moving my head to the side. So all the dewdrops on the webs didn't
so this is a single shot. This is not like a focus rail or anything like that.
No, in fact, I mean, no, not at all. There wasn't really... I say there was such a thing as focus stacking, but remember, these were at least 10 years ago. Let me see.
Oh, I see. Right,
gotcha. The next shot won the Botanical Britain category in the British Wildlife Photography Awards in 2014. This one.
This one here.
Yeah.
Nice.
I took this shortly after the previous image because I wanted there to be a connection between the mushroom and the environment. Many species have this symbiotic relationship between the tree host and themselves, one giving off sugar, the other water. So they live sort of side by side with one another. And I wanted to try and illustrate this in a single photograph. I just moved back another 20, 30 centimeters by using a depth of field preview. I think the camera then might have even been something like a D300 even, I mean, so we're going back a little while here. But it matters not, of course, what the camera is. It's the 6 inches behind the viewfinder that really makes a difference. I wonder if some people forget that sometimes. It's not about buying the latest mirrorless or DSLR, but really is more what you've got up here and how imaginative you can be with your photography.
You're absolutely right. But I mean, this one, because you're right, it sits in its environment, and the trees in the background are kind of mirroring the uprightness of the
they're echoing the graphicness, I suppose you could say, of this tiny mushroom. But the conditions I had on that week were really worthwhile, really good. I was quite lucky. I had 2 or 3 nice misty mornings. Some days it was sunny. I'm capturing things like leaves creating shadows on tree trunks, etc. It was just a really nice, pleasant project to work on. Next one, please. Quite often, projects rarely form as a result of you sitting at home on the computer. They nearly always form while you're out and about. If I'm stuck, if I'm in the office and I just need a bit of inspiration, whether I'm writing for a magazine or whether I'm trying to come up with new ideas for my own photography, it's rare that you'll get that inspiration from sitting on your backside looking at the computer screen. Invariably, it comes from being out. If you're into street photography, of course, it'll be while you're out walking up and down the high street or around local pathways, etc. For me, as a nature photographer, I have woodlands and marshlands within 10 minutes of where I am, and I can go for a walk for an hour or two, and my head is just reeling with ideas, whether it be of that specific project or otherwise. And quite often they'll come from sort of coming off from a tangent of a project that I originally thought of. So don't be afraid of starting a project. And that might just be, as I say, of a small stretch of coastline for a week, or creating a montage of patterns of pebbles on the beach, etc., that you want to put together. And they don't all have to be award-winning images, far from it. In fact, you'll see that these, although reasonably strong, they're not going to hold your attention for too long. But if we look at the next photograph, please, the result is a panel where they all come together as a cohesive set. So I wasn't particularly fussed about each picture being incredibly striking and strong, but they all held together. So this only took me a couple of hours and came as a result of a big mistake, really. The first couple of images I took, I'd inadvertently left the exposure compensation on +3. And I completely blew out the sky. And when I looked at it, and these weren't taken recently, so these were taken, I guess, almost 10 years ago now, these photographs. And it was something I wasn't seeing a great deal of, these kind of really almost studio-esque type backgrounds, but against just a natural cloudy sky. So this is really interesting because it's kind of given me this kind of Chinese watercolor ink drawing kind of feel to it, where the blacks were really pronounced and it was enhancing the colors. I haven't saturated these anymore because, in fact, by overexposing and getting that pure white sky, you're exposing for the shadows. So you're getting these really sort of vibrant greens and yellows of the silver birch and of maple and sweet chestnut, etc. And it kind of went on from there. So all I made sure I did, thinking this would make a really interesting panel, was over the next couple of hours, made sure I shot everything as an upright form, and then put this together as a panel in Photoshop and just called it silver birch with a Latin name, Betula pendula, underneath it. And so, yeah, I mean, the result could be a panel like this. It could be an ebook. Could be something that you've made from Blurb or Bob Books. And to have a final product is actually quite nice, whether it be something like a panel rather than just individual images sitting on your computer, but to do something with them. I mean, on Lightroom, it's automatically connected to Blurb, so you can select your print preferences, and it has some easy templates. And that's a really enjoyable process because you learn how to pair images, images that perhaps singularly work well over a double page, triple images, etc. And that can be, thank you.
Stuart's nicked your idea.
Indeed, it's not copyrighted, so you're more than welcome.
Yeah, I think you're good to go there, Stuart.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, this idea got caught on by digital photography magazine, I think it was, and the editor got in touch with me. I put it on social. Digital Camera, I beg your pardon. Got in touch with me and said, like the idea, mind if we publish it, and with a few words. So I mean, I have this rather sort of love-hate, as so many of us do. This kind of love. It's ironic given that we're on YouTube. This kind of love-hate relationship with social media, particularly if you run a business. I do lots of workshops and overseas tours and the like, as well as giving talks, and you kind of feel as though you have to be on social media to have a form of presence, I guess you could say. But on the other hand, I'm not one to constantly post. I'm only really keen to post those images which are either illustrative or that I'm really pleased with, rather than putting up something which is a bit half-baked unless I'm trying to describe something. But anyway, this went up, and social media can help in that regard. I've got
exactly. That's what I was just going to say. Did the magazine Digital Camera, did it obviously found it on Facebook or Instagram, or did you tag them in or anything, or they just found it?
No, but it's not dissimilar to what 500px used to do. Newspapers and newspaper agencies like Solent, for example, they would go through those days' uploads on 500px, quite possibly on Flickr as well. And then if something was very seasonal, let's say of deer rutting, spectacular morning and silhouetted, then they would get in touch with you and they say, really love the picture. Like the Daily
Yeah.
Mail, they would just have a single picture with a small caption.
Yeah.
So yeah, they
But
just found it. I certainly didn't tag them in the process.
yeah.
But that's a really enjoyable way of working.
Did they pay you for it though? Because I know what these magazines are like.
Yes, and I don't believe in the chestnut. There's exposure you'll get from it, because exposure doesn't pay the bills. And I'm
Exactly,
yet to do a freebie, and I used to do it early on, as you would. But I'm yet to have a freebie where it's given me any kind of exposure or any
I've been
work as a
asked.
result.
Yeah. I've been
Of
asked by
course,
this
I'll do
particular-
them if it's for a really sort of good cause or a charitable organisation, or I'm good friends with the person that's running it.
Yeah.
Then yes, of course, I'm not a slave to the dollar entirely.
No.
But on the other hand, the exposure chestnut doesn't work, particularly. When I've been approached by, shall we say, various organisations that full well the CEO is getting paid in the region of 200 grand, and they're saying, well, we'll put a credit underneath your photo. So, well, thanks very much. It's only taken me 3 years to get that picture.
I know. I've been asked a few times. I say no. I said no. Unless you're going to give me some money, you ain't getting nothing. I know it's hard to say, because you sometimes you think, oh, that could have. You have to weigh it up, but
you do, and also you kind of got to set a precedent in that you're kind of speaking not just for yourself. And unfortunately, this is the way a lot of these micro libraries went, and why the more respectable libraries, dare I say, like Robert Harding, Frank Lane Picture Agency, etc., have had to massively reduce their rates. I mean, when I look at spreadsheets of when I was in my 20s, when I was with Planet Earth Pictures and Frank Lane, and you were getting anything between £50 and £200 a picture. As a quarter page or an eighth page. And when I look at it now, and you're getting 20, 30 pence, from the same agencies being used by IBM and Apple and Microsoft,
it's not worth it. It's just criminal. Not worth it. No, it's not worth it. But let's go on to the next.
We digress.
That's it.
We could go on all night on that one particular subject that we run. So some projects might last but mere hours or days or a week or two. Some, on the other hand, might last considerably longer. And as I was talking about undertaking a project and then finding you're going off on a tangent because you're photographing something else. And this is the case in point. This is my hide setup. Some years ago, again, sort of 10, 12 years ago, maybe, on the North Downs. I live in North Kent, in between London and Canterbury, to give you an idea. So very close to the North Downs and to the North Kent marshes. So I had permission from this farmer to photograph robins, etc., goldfinches from my small pop-up hide. And while in the hide, I could hear, if you could refrain from going on to the next slide just for now, that'd be excellent.
Okay.
I would hear the call of buzzards flying overhead. And I thought, gosh, I'd love to photograph buzzards. But unlike other parts of the country at that time, they were very rare in Kent. Very difficult to get close to. I certainly didn't know of any nest sites of them. Now there's more than 2,000 pairs breeding in Kent alone. And I personally know of at least half a dozen breeding pairs within maybe a 20-minute drive of where I live. So they're much more common now, but back then they weren't. And I thought, what a fabulous project. So I thought about what's required. And when you're photographing birds of prey, you really do have to play by the rules. In that pop-up hide probably isn't going to cut the mustard with a bird that within its DNA has been persecuted for centuries. Most likely you have to get into the hide before it gets light, exit it when it gets dark. So you're looking at maybe 12 to 14 hours in the hide in winter, and also finding a way of getting it quite close to your camera. Well, the only real way of doing that is to put down roadkill. And so that was really the only way. So the first thing I did, if you can go to the next slide, please, Mark, was position a hide. Not far from where that photograph was taken, actually. There's the hide. It's not in situ, but it's just kind of a shot of that hide, which I built at home some years prior. It was my luxury wooden hide. It's about 5 foot long by 4.5 foot high by 3.5 foot wide or thereabouts. But importantly, unlike the canvas one, it's not going to flap around. It's a touch warmer, shall we say, and enables me to lean backwards onto the ply. So this was positioned. This was built, put together, and positioned in an adjacent field, tucked up against a hedgerow at about 11 o'clock at night on a really horrible, foggy, drizzly evening. If I'd have set the hide up on a moonlit night, chances are the buzzard, wherever it were roosting, would have seen me do it. So it would have that association with the hide. So the hide was built, then I left it, let it be for a couple of weeks, didn't go near it, collected some roadkill, which sadly, of course, you're always going to come across in the country. And then once or twice a week, I would put a rabbit carcass down. And it took about a month before they started coming on a semi-regular basis. And then I just started getting into the hide very early.
Did you know that there was buzzard nests nearby? Did you know
didn't
that?
have a clue.
No.
I didn't have a clue. I'd seen
chance.
them. It was a perfect area for buzzards to be in because it's rolling downland hills and lots of woodland. So there's lots of rabbits and carrion. There was probably a pheasant shoot going on. So there's lots of sort of dead, decaying pheasants in woodlands, etc. I'm afraid, unfortunately. So there was a good population, but I knew not. There's never any certainty in wildlife photography, and particularly when you're photographing a bird of prey, which although very common in Scotland and Wales, Cornwall, in the West Country. Not so much in Kent.
No, I see them like. I mean, I live like in the country. I was saying it, and I was just. I was telling you before. They're rare in Essex, where I am. I see kestrels. You see kites all the time. But it is rare for me to see a buzzard. It really is, and it's a wonderful thing when I do see them.
Quite. No, it really is. And they got this, and in the spring, particularly when they're looking for nest sites, they'll circle really high up on thermals, maybe half a dozen or so birds at a time, seeking out nest sites. And you'll know when they're finding. You'll know where a site is most likely to be taken because they'll circle that area more so, and they'll dip down a touch, have a closer look, and then they'll go back up again. And they're just wonderful birds. But I wasn't particularly happy with this image I took. I'd put the hide in this position, very pleased that I'd obtained something anyway. So at least it said. So at least I was confident that what I was doing was right. I was getting into the hide, let's say 5 o'clock in the morning, and not coming out till 6 at night. And it was really bloody cold sometimes, I can tell you. I had all my thermals on, and you can't move, and everything.
Yeah, I was going to say, so do you literally stay inside that hide for the whole day? You don't come out and have something to eat and go back in it. You just literally stay in there.
No. The key is the key, and I laugh at this because it's very true. I spent thousands of hours in various hides now. Is to remain partially dehydrated, shall we say? That is the key to hide work when you're in there for 14 hours.
If you are on your own in that hide, I'm pretty sure that you could have a bottle or something like that nearby.
Quite a big hide, and when you've got multiple layers on as well, it's a bit, you probably end up tripping over and banging your head on the wooden side. So really, again, everything, you can't wear Velcro. You can't have tin foil in the hide because it makes the slightest noise. You've always got to be aware that bird might be sitting on a tree just above or behind you. Because you can't see it, and given this bird's eyesight is immeasurably more sensitive than yours, just a slight knock of the lens accidentally, and you could have ruined that entire session. So you really just have to be relaxed and chill, and make sure when you get in the hide, everything is set up from teleconverter to spare battery, everything.
But like a buzzard project is like an advanced one. Is basically what I'm getting the picture of here. It's it's not an easy project to undertake. So you want to challenge yourself. This is one to go for.
Incredibly rewarding though. But as you say, it is something. It is a project that requires a touch more dedication from wildlife photographers, and there are hides which you can rent where the work has been done for you. And certainly, if you don't have the time to do something that I'm doing there, then of course you can do that. But they're apples and oranges. There's no comparison. Personally, I'd rather get a rather blurry, half-baked image of a wild animal that I've put in the effort of trying to get close to than I would something pristine 3 meters away that I pass the money over into, sat in a hide, and there it is. However sort of magnificent it is. But it's difficult, of course, because I appreciate not everybody's got the time to do setups like this. But ideally, I wanted snow, and on this occasion, it snowed. Managed to get my old Ford Sierra or whatever it was I had at the time up a hill and into position, and it came down and everything came together.
This is the result of all of that effort. This is beautiful, isn't it? This is I suppose point
You're
being made
shaking.
here is that
You're
this is
shaking. You're absolutely shaking here because
yeah.
rule number one, when the bird lands, is to let it relax.
Mm,
Often they'll feed for quite a long time and not to start taking pictures. Of course, this isn't mirrorless, so there wasn't any silent shutters back then. You're
mm,
taking single pictures, engaging its response. The camera is set very low on the ground by using just a bit of MDF with some spikes going in with a big video head attached to it, with a
yeah,
right angle view and attachment, and with my head between my legs.
yeah.
So I get that really sort of low perspective with a 300 2.8 lens. And of course,
So
the snow provides this beautiful reflector onto the feather, onto the
was
feathers.
this a digital image? This is a digital image, not film. Yeah.
Yeah, it was taken with a 300 2.8, 300 2.8 on a Nikon D300S. Yeah,
Right. Wow. Yeah.
yeah. So it's only, what, I don't know, 12, 14 meg or thereabouts, I suppose.
Yeah.
So
It
it's
just shows you,
not an
doesn't it?
enormous
It
file.
shows you. Yeah.
Certainly pre D600, D610 days.
Yeah.
This might have even been as well with a
Oh, sorry.
1.4 converter on, and then one appeared about 5 or 6 hours later and stayed for a
Which is this one here.
similar length of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, a very, very rewarding project. But if you go on to the next slide, please, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah.
That kind of says it for me when I came across this quote. It's
Mm,
very true, and I think in all walks of photography, but especially so with wildlife
mm,
photography and
mm.
landscape photography, where it's determination, shall we say, and not to give up. And just because something's hard doesn't mean, you should perhaps um, don't give up at the first hurdle, I guess is what I'm
No.
trying to say. Get
Yes,
that
that's right.
tenacious
That's
spirit
right.
out, be a bit sort of dogged, and as long
Yeah.
as it doesn't compromise the welfare of the subject, that comes
Yeah.
first and foremost with any form of nature
It's
photography.
very easy to sort
Um,
of think,
yeah,
this ain't going to work. I'll move on. When
yeah,
actually, I think sometimes you should just go, well, let's just give it a
yeah,
little bit more time just to see.
yeah. And
Mm,
not too long ago, I've had this conversation a few times when I've been asked when at a dinner table of a tour, for example, and they're talking about the days of film and I'd never go back to film and digital,
mm,
etc. And yes, on the one hand, yet digital, of course, I mean, it enables us to be more experimental. If we're traveling abroad, we no longer have to worry about film going through X-rays, etc. But what
mm,
film did was give you that air of uncertainty with your photography. If I
mm.
was working on a project like this or in a woodland photographing small birds, I would know that if I sent that film away, let's say to Kodak, it wouldn't come back for at least 2 weeks. So
Mm.
I would keep going and going and going, trying to get as good a picture as I possibly can. With digital, I wonder if we're less inclined to do that, but more inclined to
Yeah,
look on the camera and say, that's a good picture, that's good enough, I'll move on
yeah.
to the next project.
Well,
Um,
you had time to evaluate, didn't you, with film? You had a lot of
yeah,
time to evaluate actually,
yeah,
and you had to try and get it right because you had no bloody choice
completely.
because you knew that you'd
Yeah,
have to wait another week before you
that's
could
it.
get
Yeah,
looked. You
yeah.
had to really
Yeah,
sort
and
of
when you're dealing with wild subjects, it might be a bird at the nest that might only be in the nest for a fortnight. You've got
mm,
to make sure that
mm,
all your exposure calculations, everything that you've learned with Kodachrome 64 was my film of choice, sometimes Kodachrome 25. You had a third of a stop latitude, a third
mm,
of a stop. If it was
mm.
slightly too light or too dark, if only I'd have known then what I know now with scanning, etc. The slides I chucked away because it was marginally too light or too dark.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you could have brought all that detail back. But
yeah,
anyway, it was what
yeah.
it was. And the next project came as a result of me an impending trip to Italy. The very same place, in fact. This was taken in 2016. I had a week-long trip to Umbria to photograph the meadows there.
Mm,
Sadly, 2 months after I came back, this was in 2016, they had those terrible earthquakes in the very village and in the region where I was staying for 7 or 8 days. Terrible
mm,
shame, absolute disaster. And
mm.
I'm desperate to get back. It's at this sort of short period, end of June, beginning of July, when this particular area in Umbria just comes alive with wildflowers. But the week leading up to it, lots of work to do in the office, but I thought I really need to get out, even if it's just for an hour, just to get out. I thought I'd love to take some pictures, perhaps in the woodland. There are foxgloves, etc., that were in flower. I didn't want to take a camera bag with me, so I thought, I know, I'd just take my Nikon. I think at the time it was a Nikon D810, and just an old prime lens. And I dug out what Nikon termed as being a pancake lens. It's a really
Yeah,
small, 50mm 1.8 manual focus lens, with the manual aperture, which we've been able to use on Nikon cameras, and a polarizing filter and an extension tube for a bit of close-up work. So no tripod, no other lenses. And so I popped into the wood, a local wood of mine. If you wouldn't mind going to the next one, please.
Yeah.
So this was Italy. The next one is at my local wood, which since 1990, since it became a nature reserve, I've been one of its wardens. In fact, this woodland's only about 7 or 8 minute drive from where I am, and was the first place, I guess you could say, that my mentor, Ted, his name was, Ted Coleman, took me to take pictures when I was about 10, 11.
Yeah.
I'm now one of the wardens, have been for the last 30 odd years. And it's 60 acres, so it's not an enormous bit of woodland, but I've got so much history with it. Of course, I've been there since a boy, cycling there, photographing badgers, foxes, orchids, etc. The people, the forest workers, etc. in there. And I really just wanted to try for that week, just try and capture something of that summer spirit, as it were. Wasn't worried about photographing the birds or the mammals, because that always requires much more time and equipment, but really just to enjoy it for what it was, just an amble for an hour. And so I restricted myself that week, if you go to the next one, please, Mark, to just 1 hour. So I timed myself. This will be fun. I'm under no obligation to take any pictures. Nobody knows I'm doing this. So I started from an hour I left the car to an hour I got back. It's exactly an hour, one camera, one lens, in this one location. And I would just look for things that caught my eye, all handheld, ranging from ISO 100 to maybe 1600. And I just merrily took pictures of whatever caught my eye, whether it be of grasses, which that is. Next one, please. Honeysuckle. So I'm really capitalizing on the very fast maximum aperture of that lens, 1.4 lens. I'm not worrying about having to use a tripod and always using, worrying about super sharpness, front to back, etc. It wasn't something I really wanted to worry myself over. It was more about conjuring up something of the spirit of the location. Next, please. And so I really enjoyed that project, and I thought, well, I've got a bit of time in autumn. I wonder if I can do something similar. So at the end of October, as luck would have it, I had this break, which is quite rare for a photographer that runs workshops, is to have a break for a week when the colours still looking pretty good, And actually, I had 1 or 2 half-day workshops. I was able to cram. I thought, I'm going to do it again. 1 hour, 1 camera, 1 lens, this same location. So I did it, followed exactly the same principles. And I had a lovely mixture of frost, a bit of mist, some autumn colour, and just look for things like on the top right there, you can see a germinating acorn. How many of us have got down on our hands and knees and really appreciated the world of miniature like that? Just something which, from mighty oaks grown, a tiny germinating or acorn. Go back to that same site, perhaps in 100 years, and you'll have this 20, 30 metre high acorn and a tiny mushroom or sycamore maple leaves, and just really getting into, and I know photographers have spoken about this before, almost like a flow state where you're familiar enough with your equipment not to be concerned with the technicalities, and the camera is a mere extension, I guess you could say, of your eye. So you're just seeing, you're just recording really what you're seeing. And actually, I rarely think about the composition which I'm creating in front of me. And I think it gets like that because, after you've been photographing for so long, yourself, other photographers, when you've been doing something for so long, if I was to ask you what foot do you use to depress the clutch, you'd have to think about it because you do it automatically. And so when I'm composing a photograph, I'm not thinking rule of thirds, that should go there, that should go here, placement. You're kind of just doing it subconsciously, I think. And invariably, if I spend a long time on a scene, it'll always be the first couple of pictures that are the freshest looking. And it doesn't look, and it might not necessarily be perfect, but they have that beauty in their imperfection. Sometimes I wonder if photographers are looking too intently on producing perfect compositions when actually having some looseness to it, a touch more room than you would ordinarily have. Create some tension by having a telegraph pole bang in the middle, touching the horizon. Just doing those small things, which at first sight might seem like breaking the rules, but actually you're doing something which is just kind of natural to you. And that I would say is ultimately, as a photographer, which is kind of the path to go down toward, I think. Follow your instincts.
Yeah, I think so.
Next one, please. Yeah, and then on
Yeah.
to winter. So I thought, well, I've started now. I might as well finish. So I've done summer, autumn, winter, just really basic compositions, really. Just a leaf, a solitary leaf dangling there, just waiting to be dropped, and the woodland bare, as it were. Some new appearing hazel catkins and an oak tree, and behind chestnut and silver birch. I'm really drawn to graphic compositions. My love of art and wildlife actually came before photography. So I was studying art and doing it at school and going to art lessons, etc. And I've always been drawn towards really kind of graphic and simple compositions. So I think a lot of my work, although as much as the next photographer, I enjoy the task of the complicated nature of woodland photography. I guess it's trying to make sense out of that chaos. It's trying to find.
I find it really hard. Yeah, we've had.
And
Yeah,
that's a really enjoyable aspect to me. Really, is trying to find some cohesion within that frame, so that you're forcing the viewer through the frame. Because after all, we're seeing everything in a multi-dimensional way. The smells, the sight, the sound, etc. But trying to convey that in a photograph, and that's why I love photographing, perhaps in inclement weather, dawn, dusk, on overcast days, and not automatically being drawn to sunrise and sunset necessarily.
Yeah.
And in spring. So yeah, that was it really. So I just went through the various seasons, 1 hour, one lens, one location. And the result, if you go to the next slide, please, Mark, which is a very simple little self-published book, which I'm very pleased to say at least 3 people purchased. So that was really nice.
Well, they're the lucky ones.
Yeah, no, it was just a really enjoyable experience. I wanted just to produce a small book from it, because something like that doesn't want to be big. It just wants to be small, as it were, because that's all it was really. It's just a small little self-assigned project.
A book's a lovely thing because it just encapsulates that, even if, like you say, 3 people, whatever. But it's there, isn't it? It's there for someone else to look at in 50 years time or whatever.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, it's I guess prints would be similar as well, and I know many photographers are sort of wax lyrical. Ansel Adams famously said that the final performance is a print, and there's a lot to be said from it. I mean, I don't do my own printing at home. I send it away to a laboratory, but the monitor is all kind of calibrated up to standard for them. And even though I don't do my printing myself, occasionally of a picture that I'm really happy with, I'll send it away and have a giclée print made from it on Harmoniulé, for example. And you're just touching it, and you're looking at it, and you're looking at the sheen you're getting, and there is just something very tangible which you don't get when you're looking at it on a screen. Even a big Mac monitor, there's just no comparison. And a book even more so, because then that work becomes finished. You can put it away. It's completed. It's not sitting there any longer. You can kind of move on. And I would never go back to this project again. I'd never go back to the one area project.
Here's one of the 3 people. There you go. We just got to find the other 2 now.
Yeah, this is it. Yeah, no, it was really nice. It was quite well received from people that were kind enough to purchase it, and I just wanted it just to be something quite small and something that I hope will provide some form of inspiration to others to not neglect these small areas that are on your doorstep, and you can find just subject matter everywhere. But I never go back to projects. Once a project's been done, whether I've been doing it for a few days or a few weeks or a number of years, once it's put together, that's it. It's put to bed, and then I move on to another project that I work at the time. Otherwise, as I said at the beginning, you are inclined just to fill time and not produce your best work.
Okay. Just going to the next. Right, here we go. Just quickly for the audience here, Rob's going to take some questions fairly soon. I know that there has been people putting questions in, and don't worry, we will get to them, but you'll probably have to put them in again. Right? So I'm not ignoring you. It's just that if they weren't relevant at that particular time, I haven't popped them up on the screen. So I reckon we've got another 5 minutes or so of Rob's presentation, and then we're going to take some questions. So just just to let you know. All right, sorry, Rob, carry on.
No, not at all. That's fine. I was just having a look at some of the comments. Thank you for your comments. They're really nice and appreciated from you all. The North Kent Marshes is a real labour of love for me. This is an ongoing life's work, I guess you could say, and Well, I'm kind of I've been meaning to do it, and I'm finally getting down to it now. Elmley Marshes, particularly, it's a national nature reserve that I've had an association with as long as I've been bird watching, so for 40 years. But working over there, I've spent goodness knows how many hours, days, weeks, months. It's an enormous nature reserve. It's more than 3,000 acres. It lies on the Isle of Sheppey. And the chap that I met all those years ago, my mentor, happened to be one of those that set up the reserve in the 70s and introduced me to the owner, Philip Merricks. And I have this amazing relationship with them, and they give me this pretty much unrestricted access to the place. So I've been producing work of this area, the landscape, birds, mammals, since my teens, but most prolifically since I could drive in my 20s, you know. So photographed it in all seasons. I'm now in the throes of putting together really nice. Oh, can we go back?
Sorry, that was my fault. I pressed. Sorry.
Yes, all right, no worries, mate. That's fine. Putting together a big sort of lavish coffee table book of the reserve, sort of something which is going to be quite substantial, almost a legacy for the nature reserve, if you will. So this is the kind of area. If we can go on to the next slide, please, Mark. So it's full of birds and wildlife, and particularly in the autumn and winter when it becomes full of geese, swans, ducks, waders. It's the largest area of coastal grazing marsh in southern England. It's more than 3,500. It's about 3,300 acres, so it's enormous. But it's incredibly difficult to photograph wildlife because it's flat as a pancake. So to put up hides, I'm digging pits. I'm laying down hides, all sorts to work in, and of course you're working at all hours of the day. But it's where my heart is, the North Kent Marshes, certainly.
Right.
And much of it is unchanged. I mean, this very area has not been changed since the time that Dickens wrote Great Expectations. You know, so it's been like that for a good couple of hundred or so years. But I wanted to find, some years ago, a new way for me, at least, of expressing my love of the landscape, but in a more timeless, more impressionist way. J.M.W. Turner, you know, I guess one could argue that he is England's greatest artist with his impressionist work. Did a lot of his work on the North Kent Marshes and Reculver, of course, Margate, hence the Turner Contemporary Gallery. So I gained a lot of inspiration from him, and I experimented using a pinhole camera, intentional camera movement, shift focusing, and like anything else, that whether you're practicing by trying to photograph birds in flight or a new technique, it's practice, you know. Lots of it, and this is the joy of digital photography. We can take and we can dump, and we can just keep going until you think that you've, I wouldn't say mastered a technique, because one can never master a technique, but you can get it to a standard where it's fairly predictable in the results which you're achieving. Next, please, Mark. And so for quite a few months on the Kent Marshes, just simple subjects, whether they be reed beds or the estuary, gaining inspiration from the Impressionist masters like Turner, for example, is utilising colour, moods, working in inclement weather, dark grey, moody skies, moving the camera, perhaps while at the same time incorporating multiple exposures, using neutral density filters. But I didn't want to make it so impressionist that you couldn't tell what it was that I was photographing. So with these, I guess really the only exception would be the right-hand side image, where you might wonder what it is, but it's the estuary and the breakwaters in the foreground and the setting sun there. Of course,
I mean, if you put that picture, if you gave that picture to someone who knew about Turner and said, "What does this look like?" they would definitely say, "This looks like a Turner painting."
Right.
It looks. This one to the right looks like the snowstorm, the really famous snowstorm picture. You know, that's what it looks like. You know, it's got the same colours and with the sheen in the middle.
Yes. I know exactly. The one that you mean. Next, please, Mark. Thank you. But it was the strong colours and the yellows and the ochres, and much like with the high key images where you happen upon techniques by mistake, this similarly with this. And when I run workshops on impressionist images, funnily enough, in Margate as well as on the Kent Marshes. And when I illustrate how I do this, how I produce this kind of false mist into a picture, it opens up their eyes, as it does when you explain about perhaps setting your camera to different aspect ratios. Just by setting your camera from 3:2 to 1:1 or 5:4 completely broadens your horizons, completely opens up new possibilities. I've never been a lover, strictly speaking, of 3:2s, much preferring 5/4s or squares with very kind of graphic looking images. And as soon as they're kind of putting that, don't crop it after, do it in camera. So you're composing it there and then if you can. And it really does open up possibilities. And much like techniques, as soon as I kind of got to learn how to produce this kind of false mist over a picture and using the blending modes within a camera, it just kind of gives you ideas flood, as it were, and you start thinking about where you can incorporate those techniques.
Yeah, definitely.
Next, please. So as you say, sort of Turner's influence, I guess, a little bit here, the browns, yellows, ochres, and because you're already, I think, removed from traditional photography, this is the fun aspect about playing with ICM. Because you're no longer doing a traditional landscape picture, you don't have to conform, in inverted commas, as it were, to traditional processing techniques. You can go crazy with your sliders. You know, Spinal Tap would say, if there's 10, go up to 11. You know, why not push it all the way? You know, push up your yellows and your browns, have a heavy vignette if you want, black and whites, not dissimilar. We're already far removed from the conventional way of seeing a scene, as you would be with a nice misty morning camera on tripod, ND grade filter, etc. So process in such a way that, again, you're conveying that feeling and emotion that you were at the time of photography.
Yeah.
Next, please, Mark. Yeah, I just call this little red boat because there you can see in the center, in between the slipway posts, and this is just the other side of the nature reserve, Faversham, actually, where there's this lovely slipway that runs into the Swale. It's this channel that runs in between Sittingbourne and Faversham and Conyers. And as the tide is receding, it reveals all the rocks and breakwater and these age-old posts that are running into the water. And it's just perfect condition, I guess. Sunset, clouds just coming in and just required. But there is that freedom, much like the One project. You don't need a tripod. You can go out in the middle of the day. You don't need perfect conditions as you would ordinarily with traditional form of landscape photography. You don't even have to worry about jetsam and flotsam out on the water, because by the time you've moved the camera, it's no longer really visible as to what it is that you're photographing. So it's a subject for all weathers, and one camera, wide angle lens, couple of filters, and you're good to go again. No tripod required.
Good. We
okay,
better
final project, I think now.
Yep.
Well, there's just 3 words I adhere to, certainly with my project work: practice, patience, perseverance. I think they kind of speak for themselves. Practice, whether it be a technique; patience, not just in being patient with yourself when you're doing the technique, but also be patient with putting it on social media or showing people. Wait until you've got that body of work and then show it as a whole. Many of us are so keen to put it up that actually that picture on its own is not going to work, much like those panels, unless they're shown cohesively as a set. So just be patient with yourself, you know, and maybe just wait until you're really happy with the body of work. I've got 2 bodies that I'm sitting on 4 years down the line that I haven't showed anybody yet, that I'm just waiting until I'm happy, and then I'll release it in whatever form. And perseverance, you know, we've spoken about that as well. Next, please, Mark.
Yeah.
Oh, beg your pardon, it's the penultimate project. I will start hurrying along because I don't want people to start nodding off. So I don't want you to be too long here. Okay, we're going into a project which turned into a twilight project as a result of my love of photographing wood anemones. If you can go to the next image after, when you've got a moment, Mark. Photographed kind of in a conventional way, I guess you could say here, using natural light, lovely early morning or late afternoon sunlight. More often than not, using a wide aperture macro lens to throw background, foreground elements out of focus. Next, please. Yeah, and next one. And I found that by shooting at that time of the evening, this is the first image on the image on the right there is the first time I really come across this project. And this was in 2014, I think. So almost sort of 10 or so years ago, maybe 2012. I can't quite remember. It's done over 2 years, 2013, 2014. It was a happy accident. I photographed the anemone. I had a flask of tea or coffee. I started having a drink, looked through the viewfinder. The anemone was still open, but the colors had changed. So I thought, gosh, you know, maybe there's something there. So next slide, please. The following day, I went out and I found other subjects. And for 2 years, I would go out looking for flowers where the silhouette would be the main part of the image. It wasn't about the colour, as it is with poppies and cornflowers, etc. But it was out looking for silhouettes. Technically, it's actually one of the most demanding projects I ever undertook because there was no template. It was one of the first times that there weren't really any pictures around of flowers, silhouettes of flowers taken using available light at night. These were taken at about 10 o'clock in the evening. The background is of an aperture in between trees and hedgerows, as the sun is maybe 45 minutes to an hour after sunset. So it's almost dark. So I'm focusing with a torch, waiting until the subjects just stop moving in the breeze, lifted up the mirror lock, because this was kind of day before mirrorless, trip the shutter, and then just assess the image. So technically and artistically, I guess it was one of the most demanding projects because it doesn't matter how well in advance you found a subject, it still has to slot into an appropriate aperture. But thoroughly enjoyable, and just came as a result of a complete accident by photographing something, remaining till it got dark, and then really just spending, say, a couple of years over spring and summer refining the technique and photographing plants, not because of their colour, but because this is a white hellebore, by the way, which is rather, I wouldn't say one of the least interesting looking orchid species, but as far as the silhouette is concerned, it's absolutely fabulous, isn't it? It's really elegant. It has this lovely curve to it. And,
it's lovely. Yeah. It's a beautiful picture.
Next, please, Mark. Right, finally. Badgers. This was photographed in a set very close to me. I've been watching this set now for 40 years almost, but only found this composition, let me see about 7 or 8 years ago, I guess. Purely by chance, I found this composition and got that picture. So anyway, for years and years, I've been photographing badgers, either using flash in the early days with film because you didn't have high ISOs, or in the days of digital, using the Nikon D4, etc., D5, high ISOs really opened up the possibilities. But when you start when you've been photographing a subject for so long, of course, you're looking for new, fresh ways of photographing something. And certainly I am. I become bored quite quickly, not of a subject, but of a way in working, a way of photographing. And so rarely will I go out and photograph the same subject in exactly the same way unless I'm going for a certain type of portrait or in certain light, for example. And although I'd hit upon the idea of using camera traps in the past, I'd never really gone to town on them and used them to any degree. So if we can go to the next picture, please, Mark.
Yeah, there's a lovely picture that, by the way.
Thank you. Nice. Cheers. Yeah. It really kind of said a lot about the place, and just pre-focused on the branch, and luckily enough the badger came along and sat on the paws. Of course, so this is one of my first attempts. Well, one of my first attempts of using a camera trap outfit. Still, ironically, even though there's quite a number of YouTube tutorials and books out there, there's not a great deal of information about the nuances and the tiny sort of aspects of camera trapping until you start going into it. And I know there are some wildlife photographers out there that say that it's a cheating form of wildlife photography. It's only a proper wildlife photograph if you're behind the camera taking the shutter. Usually those comments are made by those that A, have either had very little success, or B, have never tried it. Because I can tell you, as somebody who's spent that much time sitting behind a camera, this is as demanding and as difficult an aspect of wildlife photography as you're ever going to encounter, not least the technical aspects, the pre-visualization, the not knowing in what direction or at what time of the day the animal is going to appear. Just so many aspects of it. And of course, you want to try and photograph it in either a time of the day or with light that's going to be either subtle or is going to highlight certain aspects of it. And trust me, it was so frustrating trying to get the kit together, working out where the beam, where the sensors should go, how to power the flashes. I mean, after all, once I'd initially set this up, I might leave it for 2 months before I visit it again. By which time I might have found that a squirrel had broken the beam in the first 30 minutes and you've waited 500 pictures and all the flashes have drained. Or a tree's come down on top of your camera. or there's been a horrendous rainstorm and the flashes of they're no longer working. So there's all kinds of things. But to me, that just made the project even more exciting. Just made me even more determined to try and get something. So, you start small. I found this lovely little location, not in a private wood, but far enough away from a public footpath that I knew it wasn't going to get disturbed. It's a tiny little community wood, far away from me. No car park, which is a great place, of course, because then you don't get lots of people visiting. It's really in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I first start, just a few words, by setting up a trail camera, just a reasonably cheap trail camera, just to record video, to give me an idea of what's going back and forth and at what time of the day. And then I slowly introduce the camera and then over time get it kind of associated with it. So quite crude here in terms of lighting. If we go to the next one, please, Mark. This is my first successful image, I guess you could say, where the lighting, I think, is somewhat more thoughtful. I've got 2, maybe 3 flash units here, a hint of backlight, illuminating the nettles and the leaves and the dog's mercury, and everything kind of came together with that image of a badger. And you only need one success like that to get you going on to the next setup. But I bought everything from a company called Camtraptions, which is a really good kind of one shop, as it were. It's set up by this really, really well, really good and accomplished camera trap photographer who's done some incredible work of leopards, etc. And they sell the passive infrared sensors. And actually, if you want to know a bit more about this, I say, when was it? The issue before last in Outdoor Photography, they did quite an extensive article on my camera trap work. So you might be able to go back through your issues and recognize some of these pictures. But it really is a steep learning curve, of course, because unlike photography ordinarily, where we can look at something on the back of the camera, you might be having to wait days, weeks, or months before you get a photograph. But it's jolly good fun nonetheless, and it is a project that I felt like I could really get my teeth into and produce rather different coverage to what I already had. Next, please. Thank you. Yeah, the fox came through as well. That was rather nice.
On the same night, or was it?
No, different nights. And I think I had that set up in total for maybe 2 months from start to finish. Because not only do you need, the camera that I use wasn't a top of the range Nikon. You don't need a top of the range camera. You just need a camera. Most of us know that no matter what the camera body, you stick a good lens on it and you'll get some really nice results. Actually, furthermore, even if you put on a half-baked lens on the front of it, if you shoot at f8, you'll still get really good crisp results at that optimum aperture. And you don't want to put out a Nikon D850, for example, or a top-of-the-range model and a 14 to 24 lens, which is many thousands of pounds, and then for a tree to land on it or for someone to steal it. So I bought a very cheap Nikon D3200. It's 20 megs, that's more than enough. Purchased a Sigma 10 to 20mm lens. Total cost of the two was about 150 quid. But yes, it's okay. You've got that. You've got the flash units, of which you need specific flash units that are going to hold full charge for many weeks. But then you need to find a way of waterproofing it, of triggering it, clamping it on trees, camouflaging it, all these things that they don't tell you about when you start camera trapping. And so before you know it, fortunately, I've got a lockup, and most of it now seems to be taken over with all forms of paraphernalia of items, whether it be scaffold or clamps or camouflage netting. You just build and build and build upon all this stuff. So when I go into a new setting, I have a wheelbarrow, and literally it's just camera bags, tripods, clamps, etc. To rig it up.
And that is sharp. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm looking at it obviously on a big screen here.
That was taken with the kit 18 to 55 mark.
Exactly.
On the Nikon D3200.
Like you say, if you're on f8, then it's going to be sharp, no matter what lens you've got. Does it?
Exactly. And I'm still using them now. But I thought, rather than just having one setup, where I would learn very slowly, I kind of splashed out, I guess you could say, and bought 3. So 3 camera kits, 3 lots of flash. I had sort of 9 flash units, 3 sensors, plus spare flash units. So I thought I had 3 setups going simultaneously, and that kept me occupied for a year, constantly checking, tweaking, etc. Because of course I was going to learn far quicker that way than just going by one setup. Next, please, Mark. And then experiment with the light. whether it be an upright picture or turning off one flash and getting a more of a nocturnal effect. And not just going for close-ups, next please, but perhaps going for wide angle pictures as well, which is really nice if you can do that. I think if you speak to a lot of wildlife photographers, given the option, they would try to, if they can, to produce a small in the frame picture of an animal, showing it in context with the surroundings. It's very difficult to do. You have to work like a landscape photographer, but when it works, if the light and the landscape works, then boy, you end up with a very powerful image. This was somewhat more tricky in that I couldn't leave the camera there for days on end because it's about 30 feet away from a public footpath. So the pole was there. And the sensor, which if you go to the tree on the top left hand side there and zoom up, I don't know if that's appearing there, you can just see the pole with the sensor. So the camera doesn't see this, but that sensor is pointing down. And if we go to the next picture when you have a moment, please, Mark, you will see the setup. So there's me practicing, which you have to do. All camera trap photographers have to do this. You've got to test the sensor. I have a snoot on the flash gun to restrict the spill of light. And badgers coming back and forth weren't appearing until at least midnight, so it was going to be pitch black. So for this, I set the camera up at sunset, knowing full well there wasn't going to be anybody else there, and then I'd leave it because I'm not there with the camera. So I'd set the camera up at sunset, 14mm lens, 30 seconds on manual exposure. You can't use aperture priority here at 2.8. So I used the longest shutter speed I could, widest aperture and pre-focused, of course, and just trying to get this more kind of nocturnal forest look to it, rather than complicating the scene with multiple lights. But that was with the a 14mm lens, I think. That was with. And next picture, please. Okay, final sequence. Trail cameras are absolutely fantastic for finding out what's going on in your garden or in a woodland that's small enough, cheap enough for you to leave out for an indeterminate period of time. And I found actually I was focused on this fallen birch tree in the hope of photographing squirrels that were bounding up and down a birch tree. And I found that pretty much on a daily basis, this fox would appear. And not just once, as you can see, because most of these I'm not quite sure if they show different times and dates, etc.
They got different dates on it.
Sure. And what I noticed,
that's on the 9th, that's on the 12th.
Okay.
So it's over 2 separate days here, it says, by the looks of it.
Is that on each occasion it would climb over the tree at the far end, as illustrated in the bottom right hand side. So that is a perfect opportunity for potential of a photograph. And photographing foxes in the countryside is incredibly difficult because, unlike town foxes, they're very wary. They're persecuted, of course. They're shot, etc., by gamekeepers and the like. So they're very, very wary creatures. Entirely different kettle of fish to town and city foxes. So again, playing by the rules. I made sure all the equipment was introduced, camouflaged. And then really it's just a matter of waiting. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. I've had to number everything here, not just to show you what it is, but it'd be very difficult to see what was in the slide. Number one, you can see the camera. So that's pre-focused. I wanted a photograph. You have to determine whether you want pictures during the day or at night. So during the day, I'm using auto ISO here, but on manual exposure settings. So it doesn't matter. So I'm hoping that the fox will arrive from dawn till dusk. The ISO range could be anything from 100 to 1600, and I'm at, let's say, 60th of a second at 5.6. And then depending on how bright or how dark the ISO would then fluctuate accordingly. But I wanted some fill-in, a bit of flash to give it a bit of sparkle, as it were, I guess you could say, because on a dark winter's evening, it can quite easily get lost. So that's in a weatherproof sealed case, the camera there. Number two is the sensor. It's a passive infrared sensor, not a beam, so it detects changes in heat. So that determines when the creature is going to go over the, and there's various settings on there depending on sensitivity and the like. Number three, that's one of my flash guns. 4 is another flash unit, and 5 is a trail camera, so I can see the comings and goings of the animal as to whether or not it's been successful or not. Next picture, please. Okay, this is what happens in the dead of night when the exposure and the ISO isn't high enough. Badgers will come in. Shame, really, that it wasn't set to 30 seconds because that probably would have ended up being quite a nice image. But I'm set up. My goal is to photograph the fox during the day. That is my goal. Next, please. And a penultimate picture of a squirrel, of which they appeared in numerous photographs. But the next image really is a once in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And when you see this on the back of your camera, and trust me, when you're releasing the latches of that weatherproof ceiling and you see this, that pose, and the first thing you do is zoom in, isn't it? And you pray that it's sharp. That's the first thing you do. You just pray that it's sharp. Oh gosh, please don't let me have back or forward focused. It's all manually set, and it came together. And you know what? I had that same setup there for another 3 months through snow, and that was the only time the fox was in that position, which you'd only expect it to be, to have all 4 legs on that fallen tree, but not to be looking in the camera, but to have its head kind of cocked the other way really was a great opportunity and a thoroughly enjoyable experience. So those couple of years working on that project, much like Buzzard project, and I appreciate I've shown you some pretty tough projects to undertake, but equally I hope I've shown you those which are really simple, where you just need one camera, one lens, might just be of a favorite bit of woodland, a street, or it doesn't really matter.
No,
be open to interpretations.
You should have challenging projects, and you should have achievable ones as well. But
no, you're right, Mark. And I know you said at the beginning, what it does, it focuses you. Importantly, it focuses you. It gives you a focus for your day's photography, rather than aimlessly wander. As enjoyable as it can be to shoot from the hip, quite often there isn't a focus there. But when you have a project in mind, then you've got to focus. Say, right, I'm going to get up today and I'm going to go there. And you're going to try and photograph it, whether it be in a particular way or a particular subject or with a certain kind of equipment. It does give you a focus. And when you have a cohesive set of images, whether it be as a book or a panel or as an ebook or just as a slide sequence, then I think it has a lot more power to it than single standalone images. I know I've said this to you before, but I'm much more engaged on a website if I see a photographer's work that tells a story, taken in all kinds of weather conditions, as opposed to here's a sunrise from here, here's a sunset from there, where it's almost, I don't want to sound off, but it's a bit like photographing stamps after all. It's just same background, different stamp. I'm losing, I want to see soul in the photography, for want of a better word, and a photographer kind of going outside their comfort zone and shooting in less inclement conditions. I mean, if I draw on an example, if you look at who I consider to be our greatest of all landscape photographers, Faye Godwin, if you look at her work, the vast majority of it is taken, let's say, in southern England on overcast days. But the work she produced with a journalist kind of approach.
Do you know what? I had I was doing an interview the other day, funnily enough, with Digital Camera World, and they asked me about photographers. Who should people look at when they're starting photography? And I just said, well, it depends what you're into. But I mentioned Faye Godwin. I said, if you are into landscape photography, you need to look at her because she's one of the greats.
Completely, very underrated as well. And of course, in this day of colour, and another photographer I have to mention who's hugely influential to the likes of Bruce Percy and Michael Kenner particularly is Josef Sudek, the Czech photographer. Sudek, if you look at his tree studies, Kenner, openly has kind of not copied him, but used him as inspiration. Bill Brandt, for example, Edward Weston. Look at those photographers from all those years ago. And I think knowing your history of photography is really quite important. And buy a book. You can get them on Amazon and eBay for next to nothing, a lot of these books. Absolutely. And they're so inspirational just to sit and look through.
Well, we are. Thanks, Rob. We're going to take questions now, guys. We've got a couple here. Remember that we are about 20-30 seconds behind. When you type it in, we don't see it for 20 odd seconds or 30 seconds. So just remember that. Right, we've got a few here to kick us off. I am going, and if you've put a question in previously, like about 20 minutes ago, it's gone. So you're going to have to put it in again, I'm afraid. Right, so let's come. Here's one here. Here's a quick one. Here is a quick one for you. Are you now mirrorless?
Okay, I'm hybrid. I'm a hybrid. I'm a Nikon user, but I'm still a bit of a dinosaur. I'm using a Nikon D850.
Yeah.
I haven't gone down that road yet. As tempted as I am to get either the Z8 or the Z9, there are certain aspects of both cameras which I'm not entirely happy with. Firstly, and Sandra Bartocca, there's another photographer that you should really look at work. If ever there was a photographer who was an artist with a camera, it's Sandra Bartocca's work. She's a German photographer that produces the most remarkable photographs of the natural world, particularly plants and landscapes. And she's petitioned Nikon to add blending and multiple exposure modes, as well as being able to produce, being able to do more than 2 multiple exposures on the same camera. Plus, a niggle of mine is that they don't have an angled viewfinder attachment, which I find incredibly useful. You have an angled LCD screen, but you try focusing on the antennae of a butterfly with an. But anyway, that's by the by. So anyway, I use a Nikon D850, and the mirrorless camera I use is an Olympus, which I use for my lightweight landscape. I even hybrid that with a Nikon adapter to use a macro lens on the Olympus, because I really enjoy the image stabilization and the lightweightness. I mean, I use an Olympus EM5 Mark III, and that and 2 lenses weigh less than the 850 body alone. So when I'm working in Prague, you're inconspicuous, it's incredibly light, it's silent. It's a really lovely camera.
Okay. Sean Yeager here. Do you use presets, or do you just tweak each photo?
No, I don't. No, I don't use presets. Again, it's a discussion I've had with those that have used black and white presets, which is absolutely fine, I think, if you want to go down that road. But I'm inclined also to think that you don't really learn about the nuances of if you're using bought presets, as it were. If I'm doing my own presets, then fair enough. But I think if you're using bought presets or free downloads, I'd much rather learn the hard way, I think, because every photo is different.
Presets are good to give you, speed you up. If you do the same thing, you do the same thing, again and again, and that's when you use a preset.
I can see the benefit without a doubt, particularly if you're doing studio work or in the same lighting condition, or if you want the same effect.
Each individual
within a landscape,
picture
then
will
absolutely
need,
fine. But not for
each individual picture will need its own stuff rather than just a one-click solution. This is a good one. This is a good one here by Marianne here. This was obviously on one we was talking about a picture, but the point is, how long do you stay in one spot?
Okay, well, I think you'd stump any nature photographer when you say that. It kind of depends on what I'm photographing and whether I think it's worth it. You kind of gauge if the light is going against you, then you kind of know when. If I'm looking at photographing wildlife, then I'd stay there for as long as it takes, within reason, because either the light or the subject just isn't going to turn up sooner or later. Particularly with British animals, because they're largely crepuscular. They're active first thing in the morning, last thing in the evening. So if it gets absolutely dark, if I'm photographing badgers using available light, then I'll shoot from, let's say, 2 hours before sunset until 1 hour after sunset, till it's dark, or at least until they've moved away. Then I'll go. If I'm photographing a flower and the conditions are beautiful, then I'll stay for as long as it takes, and that might be 15 minutes, or it might be 2, 3, 4 hours. It matters not. You just kind of sit there and you think, well, I haven't got anything to do, as it were, and it's much nicer sitting here and enjoying the countryside than it is to be rushing off. So that's kind of difficult to answer, but usually it's for as long as I can, because if you're photographing flowers or a scene, it's unlikely if you go back 1 or 2 or 3 days later, it'll be the same again. Don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today. There's never a truer mantra when you're photographing the natural world, because there are times when in the early stages of my career it was, I can't be really bothered, I'll see if I can do it tomorrow. You go back and part of that flower's been nibbled by a rabbit, or it's bucketing down with rain. If you can do it and you've got time and the conditions are lovely, do it to death. If I'm photographing a flower, I might do wide angles, close-ups, details. How many projects?
Let's move on to this one. It's just from Stuart Hampton here. How many projects do you have active at one time? That's a good question.
Yeah. Usually at least 2. At the moment, I've got 3 with a 4th. I've just been commissioned to photograph an estate over the course of a year. So that's going to be taking a bit of my time. And I was photographing Leeds Castle as well through the seasons, plus doing camera trap, plus doing some. I'm doing 2 black and white.
Did Leeds Castle
Leeds
just
Castle.
they give you a pass? Did they, or do you have to pay? Because you
Yeah.
have to pay to get in there. They just give you a pass.
No, I had a pass. Yeah.
Nice.
So for 3 years, I was shooting that. And that was a lovely project.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
place.
really lovely. And it was quite unique, really, because they wanted pictures to celebrate their 900-year anniversary. I was going to show the pictures this evening, just wasn't enough time. They wanted, we've seen this Star Trail picture of yours. We want the same over the castle. These elaborate ideas. And that was quite cool because at my disposal.
Did you get it? Did you get the Star Trail?
I did in the end. It took me a month of sleeping in the car on and off to get it because it's in a bowl and often it would be in fog. I'd set the camera up that night, stay close to the camera in the car park. I would have all the floodlights switched off using a walkie-talkie, and then I'd ask them to momentarily switch the floods on for 30 seconds so I could get lit. So you kind of feel a bit like, if there is a God, this must be what it feels like.
I'll have to look. Is it on your Instagram or something? I'll have to go.
It's actually it's on my if you go on website under projects, and look at maybe
while we are talking about that, just give me a minute here. This is for everybody out there who wants to check out Rob's work. There it is. So there's Rob's Instagram there at Robert Canis. Facebook is at Robert Canis Photos, and then you've got robertcanis.com. So go and check Robert's stuff out.
I would say, without being too forward, if you want to really get an idea of the work that I produce and that kind of thing, then sign up to my newsletter, and then you'll get a monthly kind of a retrospective, I suppose, of the month's work and projects which I'm undertaking, often before it appears on social media. So anyway, going back to that answer, at least 1, often 2, because they'll be seasonal. I'm actually working with film at the moment using a Hasselblad, so I'm shooting black and white film on 2 separate projects at the moment, which are 2 years in, and one's winter and the other one's summer. So at least 2, I would say, at least 2 at one time.
Good stuff. Right, it's gone over as it normally does. But that's absolutely fine. To be honest, it's gone over, but there's still lots of people still watching, so obviously it was good. Don't forget, guys, if you're watching this, to subscribe. If you've never come across the School of Photography before, subscribe to us. Like, follow, share, all of them lovely things that you need to do, which enables us to bring these presentations to you. It's just one of them things that you have to do. You have to engage, and then we can bring these things to you even more. It's just one of them things, isn't it, Rob? You know the rules.
Yes.
But listen, I think it's been a fantastic session. It's been lovely to listen to projects, and I'm going to get back out there, mate. I've got to it's because all these excuses. It's excuses because we're working on so many different courses at the minute, and we're really expanding quite fast, and it's just taking up a lot of time. And normally I would have projects going, so it's been really inspirational for me, and because I was going to kick myself in my bum and get out there and do it myself. But thanks anyway. Thanks for that. It's really good.
Loads of people again. And thank you for those that watched. Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. Everyone's putting in their messages, and it's been great. Look, there we go. Loads of people coming through now. So thank you very much. You stay there, Rob. I'm going to end the broadcast, everybody. Thanks once again for spending the evening with us. I really do hope you've enjoyed it. Put your comments in, even if when I press the end, we still read the comments. So it's been lovely to hear from you. That's bye from me and Rob. I thought you were going to say, and that's bye from me, like a double act, but never mind.
Spoil that. Good enough, right. Good enough, Jim.
I'll see you later, everyone. See ya.